This video will contain spoilers for My Hero Academia Seasons 1 and 2, as well as the first part of Stardust Crusaders. Hello everyone, Gammon here. One of the things I personally obsess about when I'm going through media, regardless of it being a video game, a book, a graphic novel, or a TV show, is the narrative. Now, a story seems to have a life of its own. It exists almost detached from the media it's applied to, and there are many ways to look at and analyze a story. One way was brought up by Kurt Vonnegut, an American author and screenwriter, to take pen to paper and chart out the progression of the story. The process is remarkably simple. All you have to do is draw a line on a graph. The x-axis of the graph is the chronology of the story, with B standing for beginning and E being the end. The y-axis is the good fortune axis, with the top representing positive change and the bottom being negative change. So, whenever something positive happens in the story, our line will go up, whereas whenever something negative happens, it will go down. The starting position of the line will be determined by the starting position of the protagonist. If the story starts with our protagonist having a great deal of wealth, a great deal of good health, and generally being fortunate, we'll start the line on the top side of the graph. If our protagonist starts out orphaned, poor, in ill health, or generally doomed, we'll start it out in the bottom half. Using this method, we can create a visual representation of the story and narrative shape. While Kurt's original thesis was rejected, a recent study seems to have reinforced parts of his theory and revealed something new. In this study, a computer analyzed over 1,800 books, and using the method we just discussed, created a separate shape for each book analyzed. While sorting through the results, what was discovered is that nearly all the graphs are variations or compositions of 6 basic shapes. And this pattern, these 6 shapes, repeat themselves not only in books, but on the narratives of all existing media again and again. Let's quickly review the 6 shapes discovered by the study. The first shape will be rags to riches. It's a simple upwards line. It's formed when a protagonist rises continually until his eventual success, with the starting point usually being on the bottom side of the graph. A riches to rags shape is a simple downward line. It's created when the protagonist slowly loses all that he has, and it usually begins at the top side of the graph. The man in a hole shape is comprised of a flat line, a fall, and then a rise before it flattens out again. This shape is usually created when a protagonist encounters a problem, only to later get out of it. Icarus is the inverse shape, a flat line that rises, only to fall again before it flattens out. This shape is created when the protagonist discovers or participates in something great, only for it to disappear and for him to come crashing back down to earth. Now, when discussing Cinderella, I want to talk about a big difference between the shapes that were discovered in the study we're talking about and the shapes we'll be talking about in this video, as opposed to the shapes Kurt mentioned. So, Cinderella is the shape you're looking at now, and it represents a rise, a fall, and then a rise again. It is created when the protagonist experiences a stroke of great luck and starts the adventure. The second part is when the hero is challenged. The challenge will prove far too great to bear, and will usually expose all of the flaws the hero still has, bringing the graph down as he faces failure again and again. And after this string of failures, the hero will be able to overcome whatever great adversity has become him and rise up to his greatest heights. Now, the reason I'm emphasizing this is because at least 2 shapes in Kurt's original thesis, both the Cinderella shape, well, the original Cinderella shape, and the boy meets girl shape, are actually contained within this new Cinderella shape. There is no single story that created this shape. They're meta shapes, they're archetypes. Each of them was constructed by comparing and analyzing hundreds of different stories. While no single story will actually create the shape you're looking at, it is shared by hundreds of thousands of stories across all of media. For a story to fit into this group, for us to determine that it's inherited itself from this meta shape, all we have to do is to chart it out on a graph and find out that its overall shape contains a rise, a fall, and then another rise. Regardless of how long or how sharp each rise or fall is, so long as we have our overall structure, we can determine that it is an inheritor of the meta shape. And in this way, the study is very different from Kurt's original work. Now, the Oedipus shape is the final shape, and it's the inverse of the Cinderella. It's a fall, a rise, and then a fall once again. This shape is created when a protagonist experiences a tragedy or some form of ill omen, only to be given some form of false hope, raising him up before his final descent. Now, what's interesting about narrative shapes, other than how ubiquitous they are, is how incredibly diverse they are. Remember, these are meta shapes, after all. As some of you may have guessed by now, the answer to the question, what does Friends, Stain, and Stardust Crusaders have in common, is that they all have the same narrative shape. Can you tell which? Well, the answer is Men in a Hole. Let's look at each of them and see how they each use the same shape, but in very different ways and with very different results. So, let's start with Stardust Crusaders. The overall plot of the show is a journey made to Egypt in order for the Crusaders to defeat Dio and save Jotaro's mom, a woman worth saving. The show is essentially a long series of encounters the Crusaders have with enemy stand users, and the end of each encounter is a continuation of their journey to Egypt, the return of the state they were before the encounter began. Let's demonstrate this with an example. We'll be using one of the earlier encounters with Temperance Yellow. The story begins with Jotaro and Kakyoin going on a walk. However, Kakyoin is acting abnormally, and his negative actions and strange behavior is where our graph will start to dip down. Eventually, the enemy stand user will reveal himself and will demonstrate the power of his stand. Jotaro will attempt to fight it, but neither fire, nor ice, nor physical attacks will work, and so with each failure, the graph will continue its downward descent. Eventually, Jotaro will force the enemy stand user to expose himself, and so commences his victory. And from the moment he begins to win, our graph will start to rise. And by the end of the episode, we return to the state that we were at the beginning of it. The Crusaders are on their way to Egypt to save Jotaro's mom. It's easy to see how this method will give us the same shape, or at least a very similar shape, for each stand battle, as they all follow the same pattern. We're on a journey to Egypt. Could this be the work of an enemy stand? Stand battle commences. Oa oa oa. We're on a journey to Egypt. Repeated over and over again for the entire season. Now, I'm not calling Stardust Crusaders repetitive. Not at all. Each fight is different and interesting, and you have real emotional moments and character arcs, character growth in the show. And that's kind of amazing. Despite the entire show being one narrative shape that repeats itself over and over again, it will never feel stale or repetitive.
Somebody gets into trouble, gets out of it again. People love that story. They never get sick of it.
The usefulness and diversity of this shape isn't just that it can tell many different stories in one genre. It can actually tell many different stories across different genres. And this is where Friends comes in. Now let's take a specific subplot as an example. Monica, Chandler, and Joey go to the beach. A jellyfish stings Monica. Chandler pees on Monica, removing the pain, but making it difficult for them to interact as friends and creating a lot of shame, embarrassment, and general anxiety. This continues until they share what happened with the rest of the group, allowing them to come to terms with what happened and return to normalcy. They can now interact with each other the same way they did before they went to the beach. In the same way that we generalized Stardust Crusaders stand battles, we can generalize this example as well. In almost every sitcom, you're going to have a group of characters who will, during the episode, enter into some form of wacky situation, only for them to get out of it by the end of the episode and return to normalcy. Return to the same place they were before they started the episode. And so, if we were to use this method to analyze an entire sitcom, we'll actually see that it mirrors Stardust Crusaders. It too will appear to be one shape, man in a hole, repeating itself over and over again, but this time is going to be used for humor. Well, an attempt at humor at least. At this point of the video, you're probably asking yourself, why did you include stain in this? After all, you've already shown that the same shape can be used to tell multiple different stories in the same genre by the example of Stardust Crusaders, and with the example of Friends, you've shown that it can actually tell many different stories across many different genres. Well, there's one more thing I want to show you. That a story doesn't need to be the same shape, repeating itself over and over again. The way Stain's arc is different is that if we were to look at My Hero Academia as a series, we won't see the same shape, man in a hole, repeating itself over and over again. Instead, what we're going to see is a composition of many different shapes. Now let's just quickly demonstrate that Stain's arc actually does create the shape of man in a hole. The Stain arc starts with everyone doing their unpaid internships. But eventually, Ida begins pursuing hero killer Stain, the man who crippled his brother. And that is when the negative events will start occurring and our graph will begin to dip. Stain has already critically injured one hero, and as Ida tries to fight him, he gets destroyed almost immediately. Even worse, after Ida is defeated and lies on the ground helpless, hero killer Stain actually makes good points and lectures him about how his actions are unbecoming of a hero. It's at this point, just before Ida is going to get killed, that Midoriya comes to the rescue and changes the course of the story. Now that the battle has truly begun, with Shota joining soon after, Stain is slowly defeated, and the graph starts to rise, and so does Ida, until the eventual defeat of hero killer Stain and the return to normalcy, their return to their unpaid internships. However, while this part of the show does use man in a hole, as we've discussed before, other parts don't. Let's analyze the start of the show together. At the beginning of the show, we have Midoriya. Now, Midoriya starts out in a very low position. He has no quirk, no physical strength, no friends, he's being bullied by his classmate, and even the hero he idolizes, All Might, tells him he will never achieve his dream. But this changes as the story continues. Midoriya earns All Might's respect, attains his quirk, gains admission to his school of choice, gains friends, gains a chance to fight his bully, wins against his bully. If we were to chart out this part of the show right up until the introduction of the Villain League, we'll see that it creates a very classic rags to riches shape. Now, I could keep talking, and I really could keep talking for hours and mention how The tournament arc in general creates a Cinderella story, and how the Ochako vs. Bakugo subblock creates an Oedipus shape. But I'm looking at the recording timer and I realize I've already taken far too much of your time. So let's end the video with this. A single story can be created using one shape, the same shape repeated multiple times, or multiple different shapes used in composition, and two shows with very different themes, narratives, and even genres can look identical or near identical on the graph. They can have nearly the exact same shape while being completely different. So, what shape is your favorite story? Maybe you should experience it again and find out. Anyway, that should be enough for now. Thanks for watching. I genuinely hope you enjoyed this. And to all the people that liked, subscribed, disliked, or just viewed these horrible videos I'm making, thank you very much.
If I had to, I'd pee on any one of you.